For decades, the fate of Sandy Irvine has been shrouded in speculation and mystery, even misdirection. But now, new evidence is emerging that could rewrite what we thought we knew. This channel has long discovered the controversial claims that the Chinese discovered Sandy Irvine in 1960 and in 1975, even going so far as to interview two esteemed mountain climbers and historians of the Everest mystery, Mark Synnott and Jamie McGuinness, who had told of reports of the Chinese actually removing or throwing the body of Sandy Irvine off the mountain. Far from discrediting these reports, the recent discovery of Sandy Irvine's partial remains appear to support them. In this video, we'll update you on the DNA testing that will endeavor to prove whether the remains are in fact Sandy Irvine or not, what we know so far and what we can expect in the future, as well as we'll revisit those testimonies about the Chinese having discovered Sandy Irvine decades ago. We'll also hear from Tom Holzel, the historian who actually coined the phrase, the mystery of Mallory and Irvine, and his take on this historic discovery 100 years after Sandy Irvine and George Mallory disappeared on Mount Everest. What we know for sure is that the boot was discovered by a crew from National Geographic led by climber, mountaineer, and filmmaker Jimmy Chin. They were there endeavoring to do a ski descent of the Hornbein Couloir. The expedition was unsuccessful, and apparently out of the blue, the team stumbled across a 1933 oxygen bottle. That Jimmy Chin is so close to Conrad Anker, who made the discovery of George Mallory in 1999, there's no doubt that that discovery of the oxygen bottle spurred them to go further and look to see if they could find remains of Irvine. On this expedition was Eric Repke, who was on the 2019 Discovery Channel expedition to look for the remains of Sandy Irvine, as well as Mark Fisher. I have a couple of other videos about this discovery. I'm going to put a link to those in the description. First things first, I've been in touch with Julie Summers, who is the great niece of Sandy Irvine. She's informed me that she and her aunt will be submitting DNA samples that will be matched with those samples taken from the remains found on the Rongbuk Glacier. While it seems almost impossible that it could be anybody but Sandy Irvine, this DNA testing will prove conclusively or disprove whether it is in fact Sandy Irvine without a shadow of a doubt. I would imagine that there's some emotional stakes for the family as they wait for the DNA tests to be returned to them. And now let's recap the past interviews that discussed the theory of the Chinese finding Irvine's body and how the discovery of the boot supports what many had jumped to dismiss about the location of the boot on the Central Rongbuk. In this clip with Mark Synnott, he had done some further research that we had revealed during our 2019 search for Sandy Irvine that pointed to the likelihood that the Chinese had discovered the body in 1975 and removed it. That's the word that was used in this. Let's cut to this interview with Mark Synnott. This research that Mark Synnott did ended up becoming a postscript chapter in the paperback edition of The Third Pole, Mark Synnott's book about our 2019 expedition.
It was you and I and Renan, we all decided that the intel was pretty solid, enough so that we were willing to risk our lives to see if we could figure this out, to see if Sandy was there. Mm-hmm. And I got to those GPS coordinates, and that's one of the most wild things I've ever done. And he wasn't there. And, you know, we had heard a few rumors going into it that, hey, the Chinese already found Sandy and they found the camera. And it was just really like, at first we did hear that. Officially, we heard that before the trip, but it was just very much rumor and innuendo. There was nothing backing it up. So we were like, okay, yeah, no, that's not really a thing. Then, you know, so we came home and I spent a year or more writing this book. And I was going in deep and doing so many interviews and background and research and reading, and it kept popping up. And I don't want to exaggerate, but I think I could say, just offhand, maybe like 6 different separate sources who weren't getting it from each other, who are all saying the same thing. Oh, the Chinese already found the body. And so in the book, I wrote it up. Hey, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what might have happened. The Chinese might have found the body. I had no proof, but after the expedition, someone who wants to remain anonymous, this is actually another anonymous person. There's a lot of people who don't want to get on the wrong side of the Chinese and the Chinese government. But this person who had contacts with the Chinese Tibet Mountaineering Association told our guide, Jamie McGuinness, and this is in my book, yeah, it's not rumor. This actually really did happen. And the story is that the Chinese did find the camera in 1975 on the second expedition to the North Face of China. And the reason we know this is because in a meeting at the China Mountaineering Association in Beijing in 1984, there was a diplomat from the British Embassy at that meeting, and a woman named Pan Dao, who was the first Chinese woman to climb Everest and the second woman to climb Everest, summiting 11 days after Junko Tabei of Japan in 1975. She told this guy point blank, we found a body at 8,200 meters and it had a camera, and we brought that camera home and they tried to develop the film and it didn't turn out.
And now I'm going to cut to Jamie McGuinness, who I interviewed sometime afterward, who during our expedition had spoken with a liaison officer from the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Association. And the liaison officer informed Jamie, without going into the dates or the year that it took place, that the Chinese had in fact found the body of Sandy Irvine, and he used the word thrown off the mountain. Now you have to take into consideration that the word thrown sounds very abrupt and inhumane, but given the fact that it was a conversation using Tibetan and English, it's possible that the word thrown might be just the only word that they could come up with at the time. So here's that clip with Jamie McGuinness talking about that.
So let's just say let's mention what I've heard from the liaison officers. 2008 was the year of the Beijing Olympics. I had an expedition planned to go to the north side. We talked with the China Tibet Mountaineering Association, CTMA. They'd said all okay. I'd said, okay, we'll stay off the mountain for a couple of days, no problem. And then later on, they just closed the mountain. So there's a lot to that, but essentially quite a few people wondered whether this was the time when the Chinese might have taken Irvine's body off the mountain, removed the body. So I think it's 2010. I was back on the north side 2 years later. And at the end of the expedition, came down and met, there were a group of liaison officers playing cards. And I just said, after waiting for a while, I have a few questions, and they answered a couple of the practical questions about AIACs, one or two other things. And I said, I have a few other questions and, about some of the bodies we might have seen. And they said, oh, go and see this other liaison officer. I went down to where he was. He was alone. And I chatted with him, talked, they have time. Yeah, we weren't on phones all the time. And so I talked with him a bit about various things and asked quite a few questions. And I slipped in, a leading question. When was the body taken? When was Irvine's body taken off? Now, I don't think I said Irvine. I would have said the English dead. But when was the body taken off the mountain? And was it 2008? Yeah, was it during the Beijing Olympics? Now that's a leading question where you can say yes or no, or you can say, don't go there, don't. And he said, oh no, it was taken off. His exact wording was thrown off the mountain a lot earlier than that. So the thrown was said in a way that he couldn't quite find the right words in English, perhaps. So I'm not sure he exactly meant thrown, but maybe removed, maybe cleaned up and disposed of. Who knows?
So just to show you context of where the body was sighted by the Chinese in 1960 and 1975, or at least allegedly seen, it follows along the route of the 1975 Chinese expedition. And if the body had been discovered there and then was discarded or pushed or thrown off from that location, it would have gone, as you can see on this Google Earth diagram, that the body would have continued going 8,000+ feet down, or about 3,000 meters straight down the north face to the beginning of the Central Rongbuk Glacier. And the boot that was discovered was in the Central Rongbuk Glacier. Given that the glacier moves slowly downhill, it's estimated that the boot could have been as far as 2 miles or more downstream from the bottom of the north face of Everest. So to address those skeptics, or the people who came forward saying, oh, these stories with Jamie McGuinness and Mark Synnott did not age well, on the contrary, it actually essentially supports this, that the body came from directly up the mountain. Now, what it does not prove necessarily, until we find conclusively the precise location of the boot, is when the body fell down the mountain. A lot of it points to, as Jamie McGuinness said in his interview, well before 2008, and I had originally surmised that it was after the sighting in the mid-1990s by Cheering Dorje, but some are starting to believe that the body probably was thrown down as early as 1975, which would support the research of a great Everest historian. His name is Bob Edwards. He wrote this book, Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, The Last Step But One. And in a series of blog posts, which I'm showing you on the screen now, he does mathematical calculations of how far that boot or the body of Irvine would have traveled had it been thrown down the mountain in any given year. So for any sleuths out there who are fascinated with the minutia of the mystery of Mallory and Irvine, this is a good book because it goes into all the details, and it also lists the key elevations and locations of all the different clues of the mystery. What do leading historians think about this? I had a cool conversation with Tom Holzel, who, along with Audrey Salkeld, was the one who coined the term the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. Tom, like myself, had a visceral response when learning that Irvine had been discovered. Granted, it was only partial remains, but it brought me back, especially 25 years, to having been beside the remains of George Mallory.
Tom, first things first, what was your initial reaction when you heard that some of the remains of Sandy Irvine had been found on Everest?
It was interesting. When you think about the fact that a foot gets ripped off, that's pretty severe. So, but Irvine did not fall. He lay down in a little, they call it a crevice, but it was a slot. And he could only have been pushed subsequent to the 3 sightings of him, which is probably by the Chinese. They say, get rid of the body. And they just chucked him over the side, and boom, off came a foot.
The location, at least generally speaking, does that support in any way what the conversations surrounding Mark Synnott and Jamie McGuinness have had in regards to Sandy having been found later, decades after, and pushed over? Because some people have said, oh, that just doesn't age that story well, but yeah. Where would the body go?
There were 3 people who saw him, and I think the latest one was still in the 90s. Somebody coming down, exhausted, and he took a more direct route, and they spotted the body, and they're the ones who said that he lay on his back. His face was blackened, which means he didn't die in the fall. He probably broke his neck or something and couldn't move, and he was upside down in the sense of his head was pointing downhill. So the Chinese must have dumped the body after they realized, hey, we might have bad news here. If let's say even Irvin got up there, or Irvin's camera shows Mallory having gotten up there, this is not what we want to see. So they were told I surmise, they were told to dump the body.
Of course, Tom Holzel was the one who identified the Holzel slot, which was what we were after in 2019 on the search for Sandy Irvine, the National Geographic film that is titled Lost on Everest. Mark Synnott went off the ropes and looked into Holzel's slot and found that he was not there. It was then that we began to realize that Irvine is not up the mountain, and we've been saying that for years now, that looking up the mountain is a fruitless waste of time for either Irvine or the camera, and it's gone so far as to be believed by many, including myself, that George Mallory himself has been removed from the mountain. Now, everybody's asking, why don't you just go right back up the Central Rongbuk and look for the rest of the remains of Sandy Irvine? Now, that's of course what anybody with an interest in Sandy Irvine or the mystery of Mallory and Irvine who has any knowledge of the mountain would like to do, but it's almost a sealed deal that the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Authority is not going to just let anybody go up there. In fact, I have implicit word from inside sources saying that the Chinese and Tibetans are not going to let anything take place there. Don't even bother going. But let's just say a National Geographic expedition with $1 million has tons of money to pay for a permit. I think money might talk. But as you can see from this map, where the East Rongbuk Glacier takes a left turn to where the vast majority of climbers go in order to climb the mountain, where Sandy's remains were discovered is up the Central Rongbuk Glacier, and people very, very rarely, if ever, go in there. And since the mountains open after COVID, almost nobody goes in there, and the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Authority, the CTMA, keeps a very, very tight leash on anybody on the mountain. And so does this evidence bring us any closer to solving the mystery of Sandy Irvine's disappearance with George Mallory in 1924? Not necessarily, but we do know, at least generally speaking, where he was when he lost his life. And now we know where partial remains of his are in a general sense, and that the rest of him will be somewhere in the glacier and will eventually turn up. And as Julie Summers said in my awesome interview with her about the discovery of the partial remains of her great uncle Sandy, the only way that we're ever going to prove whether they made it or not is if there's a note inside his pocket that said, "We knocked the bugger off," or "We didn't make it," with a timestamp on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Make sure you take some time to leave them in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified every time a new video comes out. And also, please check out the membership section where there is exclusive content and occasional Zoom telephone calls where you can speak back to me with a group of other members. You can also do that on patreon.com/Everest Mystery. So thanks for being here. Do a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you.